Hey y'all, welcome to my channel, Sewing with Tay. I'm Fantasia of the Eye Emporium. Welcome. If this is your first time here, I make videos about sewing, fashion, lifestyle. If that's your cup of tea, and I actually am gonna stop saying cup of tea because I don't even like tea. If that's your cup of coffee, because I live for espresso with a splash of milk. If that's your cup of coffee, hit the like and subscribe button so you know when I'm making new videos. But let's get into today. Today is a sew along. We're going to be sewing Simplicity 9952. I'm going to be making version A. I was kind of on the fence about the B because I think the sleeve is kind of cute. I think I'm just going to do A. I've done A before. I'll put a picture in of what it looked like when I did it. I have this like cotton fabric that looks like denim or like chambray, whatever you want to call it, but it's just cotton printed. I got it at Joann's. It's super cute, it's super lightweight, and I thought this would be a cute like staple to like just throw in the wardrobe when I want to put on something crazy like a bottom with a bunch of colors. I can throw in a little denim button up, and it's kind of oversized, kind of straight body. Not a lot of thought goes into styling it. So this is what we are going to sew today. Alright, so I wanted this to be oversized. This pattern came in small, medium, large, and extra large. I never use those measurements at the top because it just doesn't seem to make sense to me. So I always use the garment measurements, and like the large here is like 58.5 inches, and I really wanted this to be oversized. So I decided to cut out an extra large because my bust is a 43. So here are my pattern pieces. I've already cut them out. I cut out the front, the back, the collar band, and the collar, and then I cut out two 1-inch strips of interfacing for the placket. So I've already cut out all my pieces. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to serge my edges because I think it just makes my life easier of not having to do this afterwards. The back has a center back seam, so I'm going to serge both of those sides, and I'm going to serge the shoulders and the side seams. This is a really simple pattern, and I've sewn this before, so I didn't really take time to cut out my notches and things, especially because when I serge the edges, I personally just find it hard to find the notches afterwards. So I like to serge everything first and then go back and put the notches in. I did go ahead and cut those notches for the neckline because I'm not going to be serging that edge. I'm going to be using black thread at my serger, so I'm just going to quickly go through these and serge all of the edges so then I can go straight to sewing. This Juki here is my main machine, and I'm going to just quickly thread her so we can get started. The thread I'm using is this denim looking thread. This is my first time actually using this before, and I was nervous I was going to run out, and I did get very close to running out, but it worked out and it really matched my fabric. So here we are. I'm going to separate my pieces because they were kind of mixed up from when I went through and serged them. Here I am sewing the center back seam with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then from there I'm going to open her up. I'm going to put right sides together, and I'm going to pin each shoulder, and I'm also going to sew a 1/2 inch along the edge on both sides, making sure to back stitch. And once I get done all of these, I'm gonna go and press them, but right now I'm just gonna go through the steps of just getting the garment together. So once I get the shoulders sewn together, I realize I don't have my notches for where the armhole is, and because this is a dolman, I need to mark that because there is no like identifying underarm shape to tell you where to stop sewing. So you'll see me here lining my garment back up and then using my pattern to mark where the end of the armhole is. You'll see me do this on both sides. I'm just going to make a little snip there, and then you'll see me flip this over and then do it on the other side. And this is important because you want to make sure that your armhole isn't too big or too small. So it's definitely just easier just to go back to your pattern and snip so you know where to sew to. So once you get that marked, I'm going to go back to my Juki, and I'm going to sew from the slit down to the hem and then make sure that I'm back stitching. You have to do that on both sides, so you will see me close both side seams. And as far as the armhole finishings, this top will just have a turn back seam for the armhole, which will be a continuation of the seam allowance, which is why I chose to finish the edges of both sides so that I can bust my seam allowance open and press them flat to make it easier to finish my armhole at a later point. But now we have our side seams together, our shoulder together, the center back together. So I'm going to take her to the ironing board and just give her a little bit of a press. I pressed all of my seam allowances open because that's my business, but I just did that because I like it. I think it looks clean that way. So I pressed them all open, especially the ones on the sleeve. And here you see me struggling to press this sleeve. I realized after the fact I should have just put it on the edge of the ironing board, and you'll see me do a better job of that here because I'm like, why was I struggling for no reason? So here, pressing open my shoulder seam, make sure I get that good and flat. Since I'm already at the ironing board, I'm going to go ahead and put on my 1-inch strip of interfacing along those center front edges, and this is for your placket construction to give it some stability for buttonholes and your buttons. So I'm going to give her a good press to attach these 2 strips, and they're a little bit longer because I didn't want to do math, and I just cut them so that I knew they were long enough, and then I would just cut them off on the actual sample. So you see that extra interfacing there, it's just getting cut off. While I am at the iron, let's go ahead and do the collar. So you have to cut out an interfacing for one collar and for one upper collar, or collar band and collar. So I gave my collar band just a good press, and then I'm going to iron the interfacing on, making sure there's no extra like lumps or like gathering of the fabric. Make sure it's pretty smooth. I'm going to do this for the collar band and the collar. First time I made this shirt, I didn't try it on until I got done. And once I got done, I realized this collar is like huge. It's giving these 70. It's giving 70s. So, I decided that I was going to reduce the height of this collar. So this is 4 inches from top to bottom. If you take off an inch for seam allowance, you'll get a 3-inch collar, which was a lot. So I wanted like a 2-inch collar, and so I took off an inch along the bottom. So I used my chalk wheel and my measuring tape to mark 1 inch along the bottom edge. So the wider edge is the edge you want to cut if you want to make this collar smaller. So I just went around 1 inch, and it didn't have to be exact, but as close to an inch as possible. And then I put a pin in it so that it does not shift or move, because there are 4 layers since this collar is on the fold right now. There's 4 layers here, so I want to make sure everything gets cut evenly. So then I cut an inch off of the collar. And I'm gonna be honest, at this point I am finished with the shirt. When I'm recording this audio, this was definitely worth it because the last collar was looking cray. So step 1, we're going to open this collar up. We're going to line the interface and non-interface collar, and we're going to sew along the wide edge. So we're going to leave the narrow edge open and free, and we're going to sew all the way around from the top edge to the wider edge, all the way around to the other side. Be careful not to overstretch this edge that's not interfaced. If you need to cut marks into your interface collar to make it fit nicely, you can. To make sure your collar lays nice and that it has sharp corners, you're going to trim the corner so that it's close to the stitches, but do not cut through the stitches. Then we're going to understitch. And to understitch, you have to pull the seam allowance, both of the seam allowances, back toward the facing. The facing would be the side with interfacing, and stitch to that side only. So you're pulling the seam allowance back and stitching it down to the part of the fabric that you will not see. So this would be the underside of a collar. So if you was to flip your collar up, this would be shown. So here we're just going to finish up the understitch, and you're going to stitch as far as you can into the corners. It is going to be hard, but stitch as far as you can into the corners to make sure that it is secure. This is the collar band. So now that our collar is sewn together, I'm going to attach the collar to the collar band. Normally, there would be dots and notches to tell you where to sew these things, but I did not do that. So I am just going to line up my collar with my collar band. I am going to triple check and make sure that they're hitting at the same spot on the neck curve, because that would be odd. So here you see me checking to make sure that that point of the collar is hitting at the same point. So once you do all of these things, I am going to start pinning. One thing that I forgot, and I'm not going to say I forgot, I just didn't want to do it. The collar band, when you sew it, you should leave one edge open. So as I continue through pinning this, you will see at one point that I was like, oh, I kind of do need to do that. So I ended up unpicking a few of the stitches at the front and back so that I can go in and sew in the seam allowance for the under collar. So here my top collar is all the way attached to the under collar slash collar band. Now you'll see me here taking the other half of the neck band and sandwiching it with the collar. For me, the collar was always a really intimidating part of the sewing process, and now look at me, I'm doing it without even reading the instructions. So here is my collar stand. I'm going to sew from one end to the other, and then we're going to look at the new collar. Okay, I'm going to sew all three layers together. The top layer is the collar band, the inside layer is the collar, the bottom layer is the other inside of the collar band. So this is the collar band that has interfacing. I'm going to sew all the way around, and if you're following the directions, when you sew this together, you should leave it open about a half an inch from the end of that curve right there in the front. So you should have it a half an inch open. I ended up going back and doing it so that I could clean finish my neckband seam, because the neckband will connect to the body. And I was going to leave it open and serge the edge, but then I thought I didn't like that. So here is my collar, as you guys can see down below. I am going to take my scissors and I am going to trim off this excess seam allowance so that it can turn nicely and fit nicely on garments. So there is our seam allowance, and here is our collar. I'm going to take it over to the iron to press it to make sure that, you know, nothing went wrong. And here is the collar. It looks good, it's pressed, it's understitched, it's ready for me to sew it. So I marked the notch on the neck edge of the front bodice pattern. So now I need to mark the edge on the collar so I know where they should line up. That will probably be the only other notch that I'm going to use this sew along. I almost forgot. Before you do your collar, you need to do your placket. So here is my placket with my 1 inch of interfacing. I'm just going to fold this over once, and then I'm going to fold it over again, making sure that it keeps the width that it needs to be, which was like 1 1/8 inches, but 1 inch is fine because who counts eighths? So I'm going to put some pins in here, and then eventually I'm going to take this to the ironing board to iron. So once you have it all ironed, the next step is going to be adding a top stitch just to secure the placket. So you'll see here I'm doing like an edge stitch along the edge of said placket. You need to do this on the left and the right side of the bodice because one side will have buttons and one side will have buttonholes, and you need the stability. Now we're going to attach the collar. So we have our collar band here, and I am going to start to pin this to the body. I want to make sure that my stitching for my understitch is actually under the collar. That is something that getting the collar to sit correctly on the body is a little bit difficult, and it definitely takes some technique. I am not a menswear expert, so it took me a second to get everything together. Here is the collar. So the one side of the collar that is interfaced is the side that I attached to the body. So you will see here I pinned and slipped snipped where needed so that I can easily sew this around. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to sew from one side to the other. So I sewed the neckband to the body, only sewing one side of the neckband. Now the other side of the neckband that is now open, I have stitched a 1/2 inch and folded it over to encase the seam allowance inside of the neckband. So here you will see me, I'm going to stitch in the ditch so that I can secure my neckband closed, pushing the seam allowance inside. This part here was probably always the most intimidating part about sewing collars, as I learned over the years. I've been sewing for 15 years and I still don't like sewing collars because of the stitch in the ditch method to try to catch the underside. It's very simple in theory, but for whatever reason it always just like threw me for a loop. It took a lot of practice to be able to sew the collar correctly this way. So take your time here. The goal is to encase the neckband seam allowance inside of the neckband so you will have a clean interior. Now I'm going to serge or finish the edge of my hem because I did not do that before, because as I told you guys already, I like my seams busted open. So I needed to serge them busted open after they were already finished. So now that they're all finished, I am going to finish the edges of the entire garment, and then I'm just going to do a double turned, like a freehand one, because that's my business. I'm going to do a freehand hem, just double turn it and then top stitch it together. Before we get into the hem, we're going to go ahead and finish the armholes. The armhole finishing is a continuation of the side seam because this is a dolman. So I'll try to zoom in here so you can get a better visual. But basically, I'm going to open up the armhole and I'm going to fold the seam allowance back and then continue that 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around to the other side. So you can see here that I'm like folding back the seam allowance and I'm making sure the rest of the fabric is out the way, because you don't want to like stitch over like a part of the body while you're doing this. So making sure your work area is clear and it's just a circle. You're going to rotate your fabric around and just continue to fold back that 1/2 inch. You could be a little bit more specific and like pin this out, but I didn't feel like I needed pins for this, and this is also for myself, so it don't have to be perfect because that's my business. So here you see me finishing all the way back to where I started, and just to reinforce the side seam, because I don't, God forbid it like rips or something, I stitch over the side seam back and forth here, which is what you see. Of course, you're going to do this on both sleeves, and then I'm going to move on to the hem. A clean garment is a happy garment, so I made sure I clipped my threads before I started, and my edges are finished with the 3/8 inch marrow. So I just fold this in a 1/2 inch and just double turn it so that I get a 1/2 inch all the way around. So I continue to just tuck in that 1/2 inch or the 3/8 of the marrow edge, and then I backstitch at the end, and then I give her a good press. So here is my little dome and body. I don't really like using the buttonhole guide, so I decided to just mark these myself at 2.5 apart with a 1 inch buttonhole. So I'm doing this here, and then my next step is my home machine that I like to use for making buttonholes. Here she is. This is my brother, SC425, I believe, and it has like a digital LED screen, and I think it's perfect for my buttonholes. So I have 7 buttonholes total, and I'm going to just line it up with the mark on my fabric to start making the buttonholes. So here my buttonholes are starting. Again, I have to do 7 of these. I'm not going to bore y'all and make y'all watch me make 7 buttonholes, but I will do a little close up so that you can see better. My machine has a few buttonhole options, but I kind of just prefer to just use the basic rectangle one instead of getting fancy, because I feel like I tend to have some issues. Like something always happens, something gets stuck, something gets tangled, and yeah, I just want to finish making this top. So here is my buttonholes. As promised, here's a close-up of the buttonholes. The width of my pocket is 1 inch, and the width of this buttonhole maker is about 1 inch. So it just worked out that I can line the edge of this little buttonhole foot to align with my stitches to make sure that all my buttons are straight, buttonholes are straight. Get you a good pair of sharp scissors so that you can cut. I like to snip in the middle and then cut to the corners, but as you can see here, this is not my good pair of scissors. And then my phone started to die, so it didn't actually record me using the good scissors. So here are my buttonholes that are open. Thought I was going to use this white chalk, but I decided I was not going to use it because these buttonholes are small and it was becoming difficult to kind of get the chalk through to mark for my buttonhole. So I went back to use my chalk wheel and I went through and I'm going to mark all of the spots where my buttons should go. Then I'm going to attach my buttons, which is the last stop. I had this fabric left over from another project that I made, so I wish I had put more thought into the buttons, but I just bought a bunch of black buttons, so I just put black buttons on this because it's not that serious. But I wish I had some different kind of something button. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of cover buttons, but it's gonna have black buttons because that's what I had at home and I'm trying to stop buying stuff, aka why I'm making this shirt. So I use my chalk wheel to mark where my buttonholes go, and then I'm going to start sewing my buttons and then give her a final press. Yay, we're at the last step. So I got my needle and I got my thread. I'm going to put my knot in from the front. I like to hide it under my button. I got a 4-hole shankless button, so I'm going to just stitch this through the top, all the layers, and then I'm going to build a little shank for it. This wrapping method is for building the shank, and what makes this so important is it's what helps make it easier to put your button in the buttonhole. It gives it a little bit of height versus your button being sewn flat onto your garment. That little wrapping method makes it a little bit taller so that it will button easy. Once you get all of your buttons sewn on, then you're done. And here's my cotton little chambray top. Thank y'all so much for watching my video. If you have any ideas of what you want to sew next, please leave me a comment below and make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when I'm making new videos. But until next time, bye.